Hello, it's the Great Canadian Bagel here, coming to you with another episode in the Path to Victory series, this time Small City, Ontario. Now, just as a recap for everybody who might not be familiar with the series, any new viewers, the point of this series is we are going through and identifying the ridings that the Conservative Party must win and can win in order to win a majority government. Now, this isn't saying they must win every single riding identified, it's just these ridings are ones that they stand a chance, or should stand a chance of winning. To just cover the colors briefly, just to make it very, very clear, the colors here are not saying margins, so I'll just zoom out a touch. For example, Burlington over here is a very light blue color. This is not like my regular series where this is showing like a +2 margin. That's not what these colors represent. What the colors represent here, being the lightest colors to the darkest ones, is how important this district is for the Conservatives, or equally for the Liberals, or equally for the Bloc. For now, I am not including the NDP or the Green Party, even though they are winning seats. And they could very well win seats, especially in some of these areas that I'm touching on today, because I don't think there is a scenario where the Greens or the NDP will give confidence to a Conservative minority if the Liberals and them could also form a government. It is conceivable that there could be a situation where the NDP and the Liberals each can't form government, or combined can't form government, and the Conservatives could form, but I do not see a situation like we have right now with the confidence and supply agreement between the Liberal or the NDP and the Conservatives. So they are not being considered here for the purposes of the Conservatives potentially winning a majority or just their election outcomes. So what this means is the lightest color here are the ridings that the Conservatives can most afford to lose, but they should win most of these if they want to have a majority. And the darker colors, the ones they just can't afford to lose, period. Similarly with the Bloc, the lighter the color, the easier it is for the Conservatives to win that riding. The darker it is, the harder. The only exception is some of these ridings, such as in southern Quebec, it's Liberal Bloc. And the same deal with Liberals. You can flip this color scheme, and if you do such, just flip all of these really light blue ones to very light red, and then it also works for the Liberal path to majority, path to victory. But today we are covering Small City, Ontario. And to be clear what this entails, we are talking about Ottawa-Gatineau, Niagara, but also Niagara West here, London, Essex, Kitchener-Guelph, and Hamilton. Those are the particular regions we are hitting. So let's start off. How has overall Small City Ontario done? Well, and just as a reminder, once again, for 1993 to 2000, I'm including the PCs and Reform together just to simplify math here. And in some of these cases, there are Bloc voters, but I'm discarding them because they're irrelevant to the rest of the province, but they do matter in Gatineau specifically. But overall, in this particular region, what you're seeing here is the Liberals are pretty constant. They dipped down in the mid-2000s, like every single video in this series will say once and again. And this shouldn't surprise you. 2006 to 2011 was not a good time for the Liberal Party. But these are generally very urban areas, so they're generally areas the Liberals are going to do well in. That shouldn't be that surprising. The NDP has gained decent amount of strength in these areas, though, as you can see, other than 2011, they've really stuck around 20% across this entire subregion. They're not really much of a factor. There's only a few particular ridings in Windsor or London or Hamilton where they really are relevant. Maybe Ottawa Centre too. And then we get the Conservatives. Now, the Conservatives did really well in the 90s once you consider the two split parties, and they did pretty well in the mid-2000s. They haven't done particularly good since, but I think what we can see here from the mid-2000s is there is the potential for the Conservatives to do quite well in this region. So they're getting around 38-40%. That very likely is coming at the expense of the Liberals and should potentially push them into a good spot, seat-wise. Now, if we simplify this to just left and right, what we see is, well, the trend is pretty flat. This particular region doesn't seem to be trending leftwards or rightwards. And that probably shouldn't surprise you. There's a lot of trends going on in urban areas that are pushing them leftwards, but there are also lots of trends going on in industrial areas pushing them rightwards. And small city Ontario combines the university-educated urban areas and the industrial working areas together. Now, I'm not going to categorically say that this is exactly perfect, but generally speaking, Hamilton, Niagara, London, and Essex are more manufacturing industrial towns, and Kitchener-Guelph and obviously Ottawa are more high quote-unquote education fields. So you're going to see a difference here in the total aggregate. The trends are going in opposite directions in these two regions, though I will note when we go to the subparts, they are still favorable overall to the Conservatives. The one very notable part here is the People's Party has actually gained quite a lot of support in this particular region, going from average, well, a lot of support's the bad way to phrase this. This is a median region for the People's Party. You would not expect this normally because the People's Party is perceived as a very right-wing, very populist party, and right-wing parties usually don't do well in urban areas. Just across the board. That's just how politics is in 2023. But the People's Party does perfectly par in this entire region, and it actually does really good in this region once you remove Ottawa, where it does fairly poorly. But we will get to that now. So the first one, obviously, is Ottawa. It is the biggest of this region in total number of voters. We're talking about 600-ish thousand in the last three elections. And it's the least favorable one to the Conservatives, though they do have the capacity to gain a couple seats here. It's not completely out of picture. If you look at the trends that have really happened here, the Liberals are flat across this 30-year period. Again, with the usual big spike in the 2010s and the usual slump in the aughts. Otherwise, they're flat. The big interesting story in Ottawa is actually the rise of the NDP. Now, obviously the NDP spiked in 2011, but even the last three elections, the NDP has been getting high or into the 100,000 vote range, and it's very conceivable that in the election the Liberals eventually lose, some of these ridings might go NDP, such as Ottawa-Vanier or possibly Ottawa Centre, as just two to name. I don't think it's extremely likely at this particular moment, but it is something that is worth considering. The Conservatives, on the other hand, are, I would say, pretty flat. If we drop 1993 off the average, this seems to be about flat in vote share. Again, they peaked in 2011. That's to be expected, really. You look at naive left-right, And again, it looks pretty flat here, especially once you drop 93. So overall, I would say there is actually no trend in Ottawa for the Liberals, Conservatives, or possibly the Greens. Well, the Greens are smaller, so it's harder to say if there's really any trends going on there. It's really just the NDP, and the NDP gaining ground irrespective of the Liberals' support, because they're not gaining ground at the expense of the Liberals. The Liberals aren't losing votes to the NDP overall. If you compare 1993 to 2021, the NDP has 75,000 more voters, and the Liberals haven't lost really any, about 8,000. So all this is really showing is that this region may be trending away from the Conservatives, but it's probably more like it's trending towards the NDP and away from everybody else. But for the purposes of this, that doesn't particularly matter. So what really here is there is two main categories of riding here. Well, there's three. So we're going to have these three: Ottawa Centre, Ottawa Vanier, and this one I'm forgetting the name of. And then we have Gatineau. This is the two main groups. So of the first group, we'll call this Downtown Ottawa. The Downtown Ottawa subsection is super safe. It's almost inconceivable that the Conservatives could even win that. If the Liberals lose it, they're losing it to the NDP, which in practice just means the Liberals still retain it, but it's more radical. Gatineau is a little more in play. The Bloc has won it before, and the Bloc is generally more friendly to play with the Conservatives. But at this particular point in time, especially with changing demographics in Gatineau, it seems very unlikely that this is going to be really a factor. And then we have another set of seats. We have the outskirts of downtown Ottawa, you could call them. So we have Orleans, Nepean, and Ottawa West Nepean. These are generally more suburban, a little wealthier, so they're generally more favorable to the Conservatives, though they're still Liberal edged. And then we have Kitchener-Carleton, which is basically the same deal. Except what the difference is, Kitchener-Carleton, it's conceivable that the Conservatives, the Conservatives should win this one if they win a majority government. It's very much like Burlington, Oakville area. They should win Burlington, Oakville area if they win a majority. It's not impossible that they don't do it, but they really should be doing it. It is one of the areas they should be gaining ground in. And then naturally, I think everyone watching the series is going to be obvious on this one. Carleton itself is super uber safe, and there's no conceivable way the Conservatives will form a majority government and lose Carleton. That's Poilievre's own seat. It would be wild for that to happen. For the Conservatives to win a majority and Poilievre to lose a seat. That might be the first time in Canadian history if that would have happened. Seems pretty unlikely to me. Then we move into Hamilton. Hamilton is a more interesting story. It's actually pretty heavily split down, as you can see here, just 2021. It's almost a perfect 30-30-30 split. Now, I won't say the Conservatives are not necessarily popular here, and they're actually down over time. Though once you factor in the People's Party here, it's actually flat as a left-to-right trend. But, well, the best way to phrase this is there are some ridings here that the Conservatives might take, like Hamilton East, Stony Creek. But it seems more likely to me that there's probably not any ground the Conservatives are going to gain here. If it does decline for the Liberals, it seems like it's going to go to the NDP. And in the long term, some of these might actually just go People's Party, depending on how trends continue. Hamilton, well, not one of the best areas for the People's Party, is one of the cities they poll good in. The only cities that they pull better in are Edmonton, which it seems extremely unlikely the NDP could gain ground in Edmonton, or the other cities that we're about to touch on in this video. That said, I'm not expecting the People's Party to gain ground anytime. This really, to me, there's some ridings here that maybe with some optimal vote splitting the Conservatives could win, but it seems pretty likely that they're not going to. The exception being Flamborough Glencook. Is that the name of the riding? Let's see. Flamborough Glanbrook, sorry. That one's a safe Conservative riding. Actually, I won't say it's the most safe because I believe they did lose it once in this time period, but it is pretty safe. The rest of it is mostly safe for Liberal NDP. Not that I think it's very likely, but it is a conceivable event. Now, I will do one slight amendment to this. I think I'm going to put Hamilton East Stony Brook as just slightly more favorable. It's just slightly more vote split. So it's easier for the Liberals, or for the Conservatives to come up in the middle. And I'm going to make another amendment here, and I'm going to make Hamilton Center the darkest color, because that one is just never going Conservative at the moment. Then we get on to Niagara. Just a hop and a skip over. In fact, they're actually conjoined, these two subparts. So Niagara has a slightly different story. It was actually pretty decent. It's always been a pretty decent region for the Conservatives, unlike a lot of these other towns we're about to get into, which are possibly trending towards Conservatives-ish. Well, except Kitchener-ish. We'll get to that. But this one is actually pretty favorable right now in general to the right wing. And one of the reasons for this is the Liberals are actually meaningfully declining. Now, their vote share doesn't look much different in raw votes, but if you look at the turnout is much higher, probably because there's more people here, than there was in the 90s. So the actual Liberal share of turnout is constantly declining. And in the mid-aughts, when they did their worst, they fell down to 17%. That's really low. Even in their worst time, that's pretty bad numbers. Because keep in mind, I believe 2011 it was like 20% nationally, something like that for the Conservative or Liberals. Let me just bring this up on my other screen. It was 19%. So for an urban area to have 17% when the Liberals have 19% nationally is actually quite bad. Because keep in mind, places like Alberta, Saskatchewan, BC, Manitoba, the Liberals are going to go really low in the rural areas there. So even with rural areas skewing them so far down, they still managed to go below par in places like Niagara. There's actually a lot of room here, and it's one of the only urban areas where the Conservatives ever actually had a majority of the vote share. The NDP too seems to be slightly declining here from their peak and even from their average of the aughts. There's a lot of room to improve here. Part of this, though, for now, seems to be the PPC gaining a lot of ground from slightly below average in 2019 to far above their average in 2021. Now, Poilievre is campaigning in a position that should gain some ground from that, from the PPC. But it's very conceivable that if the PPC continue, especially if there's another moderate conservative leader and the Liberal NDP trends continue, the PPC could easily start winning places in Niagara. This is one of the cities in Canada, and actually some of the ridings, particularly here, are places like Niagara Centre, are ridings that the PPC can very conceivably win. Though the next particular election I don't think is in play. we'd be looking closer to 2030, I think, before we'll start seeing these be in play. But keep an eye out on them. It's going to probably be very similar to the Greens in places like Victoria or Guelph or Kitchener Centre. Ridings that, after years of building up the party in the infrastructure and the base, they actually managed to pull out these areas. I suspect this is going to be one of them for the PPC. Now, where does everything rank? This is actually slightly more favorable overall for the Conservatives. It's actually to the point where I think a Conservative win should yield basically all of this, at least presently. I won't go the darkest colors on all of these ridings, but it seems pretty implausible to me that the Conservatives won't win all of them. Niagara Falls and Niagara West seem almost shoo-ins, and Niagara Centre and St. Catharines seem pretty safe to me. It would really require a complete failure from the Conservative campaign to not win those, or possibly then just losing the election. It seems very difficult to imagine a path to majority where, with the current trends in Niagara, they don't sweep it. Maybe things will change, because keep in mind, in place, some of the, for example, Essex in 1993, it was inconceivable for Windsor to go blue, but now it's not. Well, we'll touch on that in a bit. The next guy we have here is Kitchener. Now, Kitchener is a slightly different beast. Again, whereas a lot of these other ones are actually possibly trending Conservative, this one might be going the opposite direction. And one of the reasons for this is Kitchener-Guelph area is more... Oh, I have this wrong number here. Is more university educated, I guess. More, quote-unquote, intellectual, if you will. It's one of the big dividing lines, and one of the reasons why urban-rural looks so stark. And it's, I want to be very clear, it's not university itself causing people to flip more liberal. That is a mischaracterization. It's the jobs university-educated people want and get, which is the deciding factor. In other words, university-educated people tend to lean more technocratic. This is not to say they are inherently left-wing. It's to say that right now the left wing is technocratic. So the technocratic people are attracted to the technocratic parties. This is a very important distinction here. But because of this, places like Kitchener-Guelph are seemingly trending away from the Conservatives, though at the same token, because of some underlying beneficial vote splitting, it is also trending towards the Green Party. You saw this provincially in Ontario with Guelph going to Mike Schreiner, and federally with Mike Morris pulling out a pretty comfortable win, honestly, in Kitchener Centre. Will he keep that win? That's a harder token to say. But it is definitely trending in that direction. And you're seeing this pretty comfortably in the last 3 elections. The Liberals shot rapidly to the front, but they are now declining rapidly quite here. Whereas in the last 3 elections, the Conservatives are slightly down, but not much. But the NDP and the Greens are quite high. The Greens had a bad year in 21 because the federal party was in disarray. But with May back in charge, I suspect you might actually see the Greens rebound a bit here. The question is just going to be, are they going to be able to keep their ground? But if they do rebound, and especially if they get 15-20% of the vote here, Kitchener Centre and Guelph are both very possible pickups / holds for the Greens. But again, if the Greens win them, that's as good as the Liberals are going to win them. So they'll be marked as such. But overall, if you look here, there is a decline in total away from the Conservatives, though the People's Party does do fairly well here, so it's not entirely hopeless. And there is, particularly right now, looking in the next particular election, the Conservatives should be able to do quite well in Kitchener-Guelph. The question is, how much longer should that be expected? Hard to say. I suspect over the next 20 years, Kitchener-Guelph might start looking very much like York. Or possibly Mississauga, or possibly Ottawa, where, yes, the Conservatives can win this, but they usually won't. Now, there is a couple of classes here, but one second. So what we really got here is Wellington, Halton Hills. That's pretty safe, obviously. I don't think anyone's really up to debate that Michael Chong has any real risk of losing his seat. And then we have Kitchener-Conestoga. This guy I'm forgetting the name of here. Kitchener South Hespeler and Cambridge are all should be pickups. In fact, actually, I might darken some of these a little bit. Kitchener-Conestoga and Kitchener South Hespeler are slightly safer, or more likely, or more mandatory, if you want to put it that way. Then we have a different class here. And this one's very difficult to really class properly. We have Waterloo, Kitchener, and Guelph. Now, if you watch my regular model, you will know that I currently have Kitchener Centre as in play. I think I'm wrong on that. I think that model's wrong. And I haven't corrected that because I can't really figure out what the math error is, but I'm pretty sure there is a math error on that. And I should have used a darker color here for this Guelph. But I can't quite place it. So for now, I'm actually going to mark this as a light red because I don't think I'm right. I don't think the Conservatives should be picking up. I think it should be a narrow green hole or possibly a Liberal flip. And I really don't think it's conceivable presently that the Conservatives could win the riding. I think the main issue is just to do with how I'm calculating green support is causing it to be anomalous. Next time I do a proper update for the Canadian forecast, I will fix this, hopefully. But suffice it to say, I don't think my model has been correct up to date on Kitchener Centre. So it looks more like something like this. And I think it's what we should really be expecting on as the basis for Kitchener. And as time goes on, I suspect you will see Kitchener South Hespeler and Cambridge slowly drift away from being competitive into something different. Though, again, right now, if the Conservatives won a majority, we are looking at something like this for Kitchener. Then we move on to London. London, Ontario is an interesting city. Overall, if you discard 93, because 93 is a bit anomalous, it's flat. There's really been no changes going on here. But what this is hiding is really that Liberals are declining pretty rapidly in the city. Their current numbers, 19 and 21, are very similar to their bad numbers during the aughts. They're on the same trajectory. If we see a Liberal collapse leading into a Conservative majority similar to 2011, I think you will see 26% range for the Liberals in London. I don't think it's extremely unlikely. And in fact, right now they only need to lose about 10,000 votes. That's really not that many in the grand scheme of things. However, the Liberals are declining, but it's not really the Conservatives who are gaining here. The Conservatives are actually slightly trending away too. Though again, I think Poilievre's campaign focus and his campaign changes compared to O'Toole, compared to Scheer, might arrest this and turn it differently. But for now, they have been trending away. The Greens haven't really made any ground here. And the NDP has actually been gaining ground, but so has the People's Party. This is one of the areas. We're only talking 6%, so we're not talking out overwhelmingly here. But this is one of the regions in Canada, especially places like London, Fanshawe, and to a lesser extent London West, where if 2021 isn't an anomaly, and it can be predicted forward and the PPC continue gaining ground, this could be a spot the PPC could conceivably one day gain seats in. Now, it's really early yet, so I don't want to make any affirmative or declarative statements. But when you're talking about outperforming your national vote share in a region like this by nearly 1% and 0.5% provincially, and you're talking about triple the growth from 2019, it doesn't take very long for this to manifest into a real win, assuming trends hold, which is always the thing in this industry, assuming trends hold. Now, overall for now, we have an interesting situation. So until this PPC trajectory possibly manifests itself, London Fanshawe is hopeless. Like, this is going to be NDP hold easy. It will be wild if it's not. London West should be a Conservative pickup. The interesting one, London North Centre, is just completely unpredictable. It is a three-way tie, in fact. Now, the way I will color this is to kind of reflect the fact that it's a three-way tie. So there is one way, or there's two potential ways for the NDP Liberals to win, but you'll see what I mean. So we got here, so London West, leaning Conservative pickup. They should be able to pick it up in a majority situation. London Fanshawe is as safe as it could possibly be for the NDP Liberals. Even right now, the Liberals themselves, which are in a third place position, are not that far behind the Conservatives, and the Conservatives are a mile behind the NDP. We're going to have London North Centre. It's going to be slightly red. Slightly red because it's a three-way tie, give or take, and if we give equal probability of winning for each other in a three-way tie, it's a 2/3 chance not Conservative in that regard. So it's definitely more possible, but it's not guaranteed any way, shape, or form. And it doesn't seem, and the Conservatives failing to win London North Centre is really not a big deal, frankly. Now, finally here, we hit Essex. Essex is possibly the most interesting of these regions because it is the one that is actually shifting the most. If we look here back all the way in 1993, 81% of the vote went left. The NDP for 1993, one of their worst elections in history, still had 20% in Windsor. Or, well, Essex, technically. But almost monotonically, every single election except for 2011 and 2015, the left has declined and the right has gained here. That is very surprising. I think what we're seeing here is a trend you see in the Red Wall in the United Kingdom, in the Rust Belt in the US. These industrial cities that have basically had terrible luck in the last 40, 50 years as manufacturing is offshored, as manufacturing jobs have been basically destroyed, are trending right-wing because the Liberals or the left in general is just promising more status quo, and the status quo is destroying these regions. What's really interesting about this, though, is not just that the Conservatives are gaining ground. The People's Party is gaining ground. They went from being slightly above average here in 2019 to nearly 10% here in 2021. In places like Windsor-Tecumseh, they had 11-ish%. This is really high numbers for the People's Party. Now, their current polling numbers are lower, so they might trend away from them, if you will. But it is not inconceivable that just one or two more elections, it could be this decade, that Lennox-Tecumseh, with current trends, could go purple. And that would be very surprising. Now, places like Essex or places like Windsor West are less up for grabs, if you will, but they are both also doing quite well for the People's Party. But unlike Windsor-Tecumseh, they're more clearly with one party or the other. The Conservatives dominate Essex for the most part, and the NDP dominate Windsor West for the most part. Windsor-Tecumseh is more of a up for grabs riding, and the People's Party could easily come up through the middle here. This is something to watch out for, especially depending on how the mood goes in the future. How popular trends drift. I'm not saying it is guaranteed. I'm not saying it is certain, but this is definitely one to watch out for. Just like how, what's it called? Maze riding. What was maze riding's name? Saanich-Gulf Islands was one of the first ones to go green. It's definitely one to watch out for. But overall here, we have a very similar trend. It seems very unlikely, at least presently, that Windsor West could go anywhere of interest to the Conservatives. And it seems unlikely that they could lose Essex. So not impossible. They have lost it before. But the last 19 years of electoral history in Essex have been pretty safely Conservative. The one interesting one remains is Windsor-Tecumseh. Here, unlike London or Centre, because these are very similar ridings, I actually think Windsor-Tecumseh is more likely to flip, even though, especially if, for example, you look at 338. 338 actually has this one less safe for the Conservatives. But there's a difference here that I don't think the polls are capturing. Because keep in mind, my model, too close to call, 338. Anyone else you find, most of this is proportional swings as the basic fundamental building block. That doesn't capture magnitude changes. seismic changes. If a region such as Windsor-Tecumseh radically shifts, you can't predict that with a proportional swing. It's truly impossible. It's also why, methodologically speaking, proportional swings are very difficult for new parties, because you don't know, you don't have a baseline to assume anything from. I think based off of leadership numbers and rally numbers, Windsor seems like it's going to be easier than London. I think the polls, models using proportional swing, are going to underestimate those two as a result. But I could be wrong. Either way, just look at it this way, that London and or Essex are areas you need to consider for a Conservative win. So that more or less wraps up Small City Ontario. If you liked the video, by all means like, share, subscribe, comment below if you think I'm off base, if you think I'm missing something, if you think I'm oversimplifying. Please, by all means. If you comment what you want to see next, I do have a couple regions in mind. I'm not going to name them, but feel free to comment them. I did this one as a higher priority because people last video said they wanted to see more Ontario. So I did the more interesting part of Ontario because I feel like rural Ontario, other than Northern Ontario, is pretty predictable. But with that, I bid you adieu, and I will see you next week with something different.